Sunday marks exactly 30 years since President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law.
And once again, we rejoice as this barrier falls, proclaiming together, we will not accept, we will not excuse, we will not tolerate discrimination in America.
The ADA banned discrimination based on disability. It helped shape the lives of Americans previously left on the margins by requiring employers and institutions to provide equal access. It represented a giant leap forward, but to this day, it has not been fully implemented. To talk about this, I want to bring in Dr. Feranmi Okanlami. He's assistant professor of family medicine and physical medicine and rehabilitation at the University of Michigan and spokesperson for Guardian Life in their Equal and Able partnership. Dr. Okanlami, how has the ADA affected your life?
Thank you for having me and for covering this important milestone. You know, that question's been asked multiple times over the past few days, and I've given various permutations of this answer, but what it really is, it's just allowed me to have the same life that other people have. You know, there are lots of, fantastic and amazing things I could say about allowing me to travel and to get an education and to spend time with my family. But the bottom line is that the ADA is not something over the top and extra. It literally just provides equal access to the same rights that non-disabled people have.
And you, I understand, were partially paralyzed in a pool accident a few years ago?
That's right. You know, after being an academic All-American track athlete at Stanford, I did my medical school at Michigan, and then in my third year of orthopedic surgery residency at Yale, I had a spinal cord injury, which left me paralyzed from my chest down with very minimal use of my upper extremities. I then had some return of motor function and went back and got a master's degree in engineering, science, and technology entrepreneurship at Notre Dame. And that is when my partnership with Guardian began, because if it weren't for the comprehensive disability insurance that I had, there were not things in place that allowed me to have equal access. And therefore, I worked with Guardian to be able to get additional resources that let me then go back to work. I got a master's, as I said. I finished a family medicine degree, and I was appointed to the St. Joseph County Board of Health by Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So, I say this not to pat myself on the back about my own story, but merely to demonstrate that I am not the first or the best or the only. I am just one individual with a physical disability that would have had significant limitations in what I was given the opportunity to do, not because of a lack of ability, but because of a lack of structure and resources to then give access to people like me.
Well, your story of resilience is remarkable. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the Americans with Disabilities Act. How did it come to be, and who pushed for it?
So we've had multiple civil rights movements that have happened in this country, and I think this is a very poignant time to discuss it, given the two pandemics of racism and COVID-19 that we have right now. But the ADA was another civil rights movement from multiple individuals with physical disabilities, with cognitive disabilities, intellectual disabilities, people that were seen as other, that were marginalized, that were voices that were not seen. I think that a great example could be if anyone wants to watch something called Crip Camp that was actually produced by Barack and Michelle Obama. It's a movie that talks about some of the activists that were fighting for equal rights and then finally were able to get this signed into law on July 26th of 1990. And as you said, it was George H.W. Bush that was the one that signed it. And then we had the ADA Amendments Act that came in 2008. And that really was just trying to expand the definition of disability to make it harder for individuals to then try to discriminate and try to exclude people with disabilities from being able to get access to these resources.
And then the law was amended in 2008. So how significant was that amendment?
So it's somewhat unfortunate that that amendment even had to happen. But what that did was it was really allowing people that had to do extraordinary things to justify or demonstrate their disability to then be able to get access to those resources, because people were then having a difficult time being able to get these very rights that were then signed into law. And so the Amendments Act really created it such that there was a broader definition, and it was meant to create easier access for people to get these things. And I'd like to remind everyone that these things that I refer to were merely the floor. They were the minimum standard of what should be done. And even that minimum standard is not something that's done in all public spaces across our country.
And there are still plenty of obstacles to be overcome because 30 years after the original law passed, only a fourth of nearly 500, for example, 500 New York City subway stations are ADA compliant. And there are many other examples like that all over the country. So how do we address these ongoing issues?
You know, I like to talk about intersectionality when that question comes up, because I think too often we focus on one specific group and then we think that what we need to do should just suit them alone. But with respect to disability, disability is ubiquitous. It does not discriminate based on race or gender or ethnicity or socioeconomic status. And so I think it's a wonderful, it's a wonderful example to use about how we are not doing what we can for our most vulnerable populations, for our minority populations, people with disabilities, people of color. And so I think that what we could do is that if we do a better job of creating access for one, then we'll be able to create access for all. And so something that does not work for someone with a disability should not work for anyone. And I think too often we focus on the number of people with disabilities that may be impacted and the cost that will be incurred by trying to make some of the modifications or renovations that are needed. But I often tell people that while everyone can use a ramp, not everyone can use the stairs. And therefore, there should not be a significant difficulty in building more ramps that create access to the things that everybody should need to be able to have.
That's such a great example. Are there challenges for the disabled that remain that are still not covered by the ADA?
Absolutely. So the ADA was not intended to be some all-inclusive law, right? That would have been an ideal. But what it was meant to do is really get people to recognize the fact that the bare minimum is not there for everyone. And so I do think that not only is it that the law wasn't intended to be all-encompassing, but the actual practice of the law, people then implementing the things that the law says, that isn't something that's being done. So I tell people, while I could give lots of examples of things that aren't technically covered by the ADA, I would love for everyone to be doing the bare minimum. And that's not something that already happens. So I'd say, easy examples as curb cutouts, ramps to get into buildings, elevators, accessible stairways and hallways that people can maneuver around, creating the appropriate amount of space. These are things that are simple. And I want to be very direct when I say too often we focus on physical disabilities and we don't acknowledge the mental health disabilities, learning disabilities, those invisible disabilities that people carry every single day and have just as much of a stigma associated with them, but that people can't always see the struggles that you have when your disabilities are invisible, yet you still have a lack of access like the rest of us with physical disabilities just are able to demonstrate in a visible way to more people. So I think that we have a lot of room to go, but I don't want to be completely negative because there's been a lot of progress made. And I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you today if it weren't for people like Guardian, my family, the friends that have supported me, and the resources that do exist. But I think on this 30th anniversary, it's a good time for us to look towards the sky and what the limits could be up there and not worry so much about the floor and where people should be having basic standard access.
Well, Dr. Okanlami, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.